Let's Chat About It is a thought-provoking podcast where your hosts Lenora Sneva and Max Brown engage in meaningful conversations with everyday individuals about the pivotal moments when they realized they were different.
All right, welcome back to Let's Chat About It. Today we have Crogger on the call, and he's from my church. So excited for you all to meet him. Max,
this is number 3 in a little series we're doing.
Exactly. We got one more. We got Joe coming after that. But Max, what's the question of the week?
What is like your favorite? We're kind of on the precipice of summer. What is your favorite summer activity that you can't really do any other time of the year that you're really looking forward to?
I just like to be outside in the sun.
But are you like I gotta go walk, I gotta go garden? Or are you just sitting out there?
I like to garden. I do like to garden, and we go for walks. Walks are boring to me sometimes, just because if it's like the same thing, I'm like, oh, can we do something different? I do like to go to the beach. I mean, our beaches in Washington State are not like in California, or in Mexico. But yeah,
that's what you got.
But I like, I just want to be out, like water, beach, sun, please.
Okay. And if you're then I'm going to ask you a follow up on the gardening. Flowers or vegetables?
Both, but
lately primarily.
But I have done vegetables. During COVID, I tried.
You tried to not go so well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. How about you?
Tried. Well, I used to like golfing in the summer. Before it was 170 billion degrees over here.
Yeah. You do golfing in the spring?
Yes. And no, I think honestly, it'll probably be pool. Like I think this year will be more pool time in the summer. But we're taking a trip back to the Pacific Northwest for we might shorten it. We haven't quite figured out what we're gonna do yet, but we're gonna at least be in Oregon for a little while with family, which will be nice. And then just seeing some friends and looking forward to it. But yeah, it's I think when my wife Shannon went to we were at a park one day. She's talking to this lady and she's like, yep, we got 4 seasons here. We got fall, we got spring, we got summer, and we got hell. So just get ready for it. Exactly. We're getting ready for hell. That's
exactly.
That's where we're at.
Let's bring in Craig.
All right. I'm looking forward to Craig. This is a different demographic for us. So I'm excited.
All right. Welcome back to Let's Chat About It. And we have Craig Crogger here. Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, if I go back to the beginning, I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and grew up in Hartford and East Hartford. Was there for the first 18 years of my life, and then off to college in Maine, and then off to Moore College graduate school in New York State, and wound up by a circuitous route becoming a soil scientist. I was always interested in science. And kind of started out in chemistry, and I realized I got all the way to graduate school in chemistry, realized I didn't like it that much. It was likely to cut 10 years off of my life because lab safety standards were not what they are now. And so I thought, man, if I could do something, use my science and maybe do some outside. So I wound up becoming a soil scientist. After I finished up, I went to North Carolina and worked there for 5 years at North Carolina State. And I was my work was focused on septic systems, which, sounds, kind of
dirt and poop.
Strange.
All right.
I remember my mother saying, "You went to all this school and you're working on septic systems."
She was proud. She was very proud, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think proud of the education. Wasn't so sure about that. And then in 1984, I got a job out here working for WSU, and I was based at the what they then called an experiment station, now a research and extension center in Puyallup. Okay. And I did more work with septic systems. Basically, a lot of it was educating county public health people and septic system designers, installers on the basics of soil. So a lot of education there. And then I expanded out. We did some work with pesticides and groundwater. We worked for many years with biosolids, which was the kind of word for treated sewage sludge suitable for agricultural applications.
You have to find nice ways to say poop. Just
yeah,
it's just poop, isn't it?
And dairy manure, compost, and that morphed into organic farming systems, which is kind of where I wound up at the end, and a little bit of climate change. But there were a number of things that we could have easily gotten on America's Dirtiest Jobs.
Awesome. You were doing it before Mike Rowe. That's what I
yeah, we were.
Very cool.
And one thing I really loved about my job was we got to go out in the field and get dirty. I liked numbers. I got to play with numbers, all the data, and kind of solve mysteries and say, what is all this telling us? And then I got to teach, and I wasn't in classroom teacher. I was what was called an extension educator. So it was going around the state, and sometimes out of state, and sometimes out of the country, doing, teaching and learning at the same time, from farmers, gardeners, other professionals, and things. So that was my career in a nutshell. Things that I like to do. I've been a lifetime runner, and I'm almost 74, and my knees haven't given out yet. So
awesome.
I'm still running, much slower and shorter than at one time, but still doing it. My wife and I danced for probably about 25 years, and that was how we met. But because of her health issues, we're not dancing anymore. But other things, I'm a big time gardener. And when I was a kid, I played the accordion. And just before COVID, I took it up again, and it wound up being the perfect COVID thing. So I spend a lot of time playing
that
the
to
accordion.
me, Craig, I'm sorry, but that seems like one of those things that if I was married to you, I'd be like, that is the worst hobby you have ever had. Please do not take that up again. But you're still happily married?
Yes, still.
Great.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Good.
And the accordion, I could spend 20 minutes talking about how great an instrument the accordion is, but I'll just sum it up in this one. You may have seen the Gary Larson cartoon where there's this picture of somebody's going to heaven, and here's St. Peter there. Welcome to heaven. Here's your harp. And then there's the other side of the picture. There's a devil there saying, welcome to hell. Here's your accordion.
Oh God.
And I thought, man, hell might not be all that bad. So.
Did you play the accordion growing up, like in high school or grade school?
Well, yeah, for grade school through high school, and then I discovered the guitar, and I was never a very good guitarist, but I played guitar for the next 50 years or whatever. And then
were you in the band, and you played the accordion like at football games?
No, it was an individual.
I want to go to those football games.
Yeah. And I'm just learning how to play with other people now. So that's kind of a new thing, learning in old age. I guess maybe the other lifetime thing is, my wife and I have been married almost 25 years, and my second marriage, and I have 3 kids. Two sons, a daughter, 3 grandsons. They're all married, and then 2 stepsons who are not married, and all in the 40-ish range. The youngest is 34, and the rest are within a year of 40, one way or the other. So,
awesome.
So that's my family, and it's been one of the best things about my life is having kids and being able to raise my kids, and that's something that I've really enjoyed. And and maybe question.
No, I had a question about the dancing real quick. So what kind of ballroom dancing,
ballroom salsa,
square dancing,
break?
What were you doing?
Break dancing.
Wasn't break dancing, and not much ballroom. A lot of West Coast swing. Okay. And a few things related to that, a little bit of salsa, a little bit of hustle, but mostly West Coast swing. And then we started dancing Argentinian tango. Cool. And got hooked on that. And probably the last 8-10 years of our dancing time, we were 90% of what we were dancing was tango. Yeah.
Awesome.
And that was fun. And that's how I got back into the accordion, was being at a tango dance. And 2 accordionists were doing the live music.
Yes. And you're like, I can do that.
I want to do that again. A week later, I had to use the accordion, and 2 weeks after that, one of them was my teacher, and
Wow.
the rest goes on. Yeah.
That's so
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
So tell us about where you were when you first knew you were different, Craig.
Okay, I spent some time thinking about this, and when I was young, I thought I was different. And then when I look back on it, I realized it was all pretty trivial stuff. Again, growing up in the Hartford, Connecticut area, and it was a community. East Hartford was pretty homogeneous, working class, and suburbia. And at that time, that was the heyday of the working class in America. The 1950s and 60s, we were home to Pratt & Whitney aircraft. And, when everybody's dad or mom worked there, and if they didn't, they worked for an insurance company. And, everybody had their little house in the suburbs. And my dad didn't work for Pratt & Whitney, and my mom didn't work for insurance. So I was a little bit different. Lots of relatives worked in those businesses. And it was predominantly a Catholic community, generally second, third generation immigrants. And although I had Catholic roots, I didn't know it at the time. Although I was mostly Irish, my family did not play that up. So I felt like I did not have this tradition. I was just kind of a bland white kid.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of interesting in that regard. And maybe the other thing where I felt different is when I was 5, I had polio. So I was a polio kid, but I was one of the lucky ones that came out, with not being slowed down at all. It took me about a year, but not being slowed down at all. I was a terrible athlete, except for long distance running, which I discovered in 4th grade and kept on going ever since. And so, and then I was an only child, and it was not my parents' desire. It was just, they felt very lucky that they had one, because my mom had health issues, and they never expected to have kids and wanted to have kids. And so I was a blessing in that way. And that's something that, it took me till later in life to really realize. So my differences with every other white kid in my white suburban town, were pretty small, but I felt that way. And so I'll see if, something else comes up as I go along. But one thing I was thinking of was thinking about where I was growing up, and thinking kind of about the racial history and how it affected me, how it affected my family, how it affected the community. And as I say, East Hartford, when I was growing up, it was probably 98% white. It's probably about 38% white now. So it's changed very much over the years. And when I look at my family, I can point to different uncles and things, where the racism was pretty obvious. And even, maybe it took me, not when I was a kid, but later on, I could recognize it. And really the whole atmosphere was steeped in racism. And that may be a universal thing, but it was really there. And it was something that my mom talked about some. It was interesting. Their experiences were a little bit different, as my mom was definitely someone who felt that she was different, that she was an outsider. Her parents died when she was young. And so she was raised by other relatives. And she would tell me about when she was in high school, she had about 3 best friends. One of them was a real popular girl. And then one was the only Jewish girl in the high school, and the other was the only Black girl in the high school. And she talked about one time they went out to a restaurant to eat together, and they got kicked out.
Wow.
Because, and this was in Hartford, Connecticut, the North.
This was like 1920s or 30s?
This would have been, probably in the early 30s, I would say. Yeah. Wow. Yep. So about that time. And then my mom had tuberculosis, and so she was, that was like the AIDS of that time. So, ostracized by a lot of people, but her TB friends became friends for life. And so she had an understanding of who was, when you're talking about the othering and belonging, who was othered. She felt like an other, and she recognized other folks who were. So she was always, and kind of imbued in me, love your neighbor as yourself, and your neighbor doesn't have to look like you or talk like you or act like you. And so I got that from her. And then my dad, he was a lot more quiet guy. But his experience was during World War II, and he didn't talk much about the war, but he was in the Army, first the infantry and then the Air Corps throughout the war. And when he first, he started out as a private, went to officer candidate school. And the first thing they had him do was they sent him to the southern US, and he was to train Black troops. The Army was segregated at the time, and the Black troops were basically being trained for menial jobs. And he never said much about it, just a couple things. One was he felt like a lot of these young men, they had grown up in the South, in the Depression, on the tenant farm, and very little schooling, had never been really away from home. And here Uncle Sam suddenly wanted them and threw them into this place. And it was just, I think, real challenging for him to deal with, how do these folks, fit into the Army. And the only other thing that he ever mentioned, because I think it was a real struggle for him, was one time when the town fathers from whatever town it was came in and said, "Hey, your troops were in town raising hell, and we want to." And he said, on Saturday night, he said, nobody left the base. We were all here together, and I'll vouch for them. And the town fathers left. And other than that, never said a whole lot. So I had this kind of mixed background in a society, a culture steeped in racism, with kind of some more nuanced views and upbringing from my parents. We went to church it was a racially mixed church, and they didn't choose the church because it was a racially mixed church. When we lived in Hartford before we moved to the suburbs, it was the closest one nearby, but even closer to it was a housing project. It was virtually all Black. And I think some of the families there, well, this church is close, our kids will go to Sunday school there. And it was an Episcopal church, and I think that, and this is just from a little bit that I've heard, my thinking now is I think a lot of the families were from immigrants from the British occupied Caribbean islands and the Anglican church. So I think that was in the roots, because the church was not at all like Peace. It was about the stodgiest place that I can remember. But anyway, we were part of that church, and my parents stayed there for a number of years. It was, I think, very patriarchal at the time they were there, and things changed some. And then when I was in, I guess, around sixth grade, my mother was secretary at a church. We had moved to East Hartford at a church nearby, so I started going to Sunday school there. And maybe a couple other points along the way is Hartford was, again, very segregated. The city of Hartford had a white part of town, a Puerto Rican part of town, a Black part of town. And then the Black and the Puerto Rican parts got kind of mixed together. And then all the white folks left, as time went on. But in our family, I felt like there was a lot of prejudice against Puerto Ricans, and that kind of, got into me as well. But our church in East Hartford, for the youth, every year we went to Puerto Rico, and there were a bunch of other churches who did that kind of a mission trip, a week in Puerto Rico during winter break. And, and that was eye-opening for me. It was just a great experience. I didn't know any Spanish, but to be there, being the guests of our Puerto Rican counterparts, working side by side with them, and kind of that really helped kind of evaporate, prejudices that I had. And then in college, summer job, I worked for Coca-Cola for 3 years, for the Coca-Cola bottling plant. And that was kind of, I got that first summer senior year out of high school. And that was the cool job to have. So I thought, hey, I'm doing something cool. I am working at Coca-Cola with the school kids. And I worked there 3 summers. And the third and the first 2 summers, I got to work with it was called Premix, and we made all the soda mixes for the soda fountains. And the guy who was in charge of that, he was a Black American, I think out of Alabama. He was probably in his 40s, and I was his helper. And he just treated me really, I worked hard, and he treated me really well. And we just had this great relationship. And I, something, I never really got to. It wasn't until years later that I said, man, I would like to have just thanked him for the way that he welcomed me into that summer. And so that was that was another positive experience. And then the third summer I was there, I worked nights, and it was probably 80% Puerto Rican. And again, I didn't know any Spanish, so we had all this code. This means break time, and I still remember that. And again, working side by side, and I think my that kind of erased the last of the prejudices that I had. But then I looked through the rest of my life for a long time, when I was in a pretty white world. College was mostly white. They were recruiting more Black students, but I didn't have nearly as much interaction as I might have been able to.
Well, but Craig, you said, correct me if I'm wrong, you went to Raleigh then at NC State for graduate school, is that right?
Yeah.
So how was that experience? I mean, I'm assuming this is probably like 1970s. You're in Raleigh, North
79
Carolina?
to 84, yeah.
Okay. What was that experience like, coming from the Northeast down to kind of more the Southern United States?
It wasn't all that different. One thing that was nice, I was working out in the hinterlands quite a bit, so it wasn't all the kind of the cloistered college community, and definitely among the white folks, the racial prejudice was more overt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely more overt. And I had, and the church I went to there, it was a white church. It was very progressive. I think they had tried to combine with, there was a white church and a Black church talking about combining at one time. But I think for the folks in the white church, they weren't into,
those 2 hours
of worship services and all of the, and all of the life that was in the Black churches. But one thing we did was every summer for 4 weeks, our church would shut down and we would visit a different Black church every week. And so that was a great experience for us. But that was the best that we did. But one of my friends there, and he was older than me, and he had come to the South for the Civil Rights Movement, then gone to Japan and taught English in Japan and learned Japanese, and then came back to North Carolina. And he, in part, one of his jobs was he worked with the Japanese business people for IBM to kind of acculturate them. He also had all these connections with Raleigh's Black community. And he was one person who I just saw, it seemed like he could seamlessly work among the different communities, as divided as they were. So he was, I always thought, man, I would like to be more like him. Then in 84, and I was just starting to get there when I got the job in Washington.
Because I was going to ask you, was there anything in particular that you maybe saw him do or learned from him in that experience, of being able to kind of move amongst different people, groups of people and still connect? Was there anything that you took away from that experience?
I think he wasn't afraid to do it. And I think that I had been, and this will get to the final question of what would I tell my younger self. And I think that I had been. I was shy, and that shyness worked against me, and I could tell a lot of stories about that, but we don't have time for all.
We're limited.
all of those. Maybe I will tell one. Is back when I was working for Coca-Cola, and there was and one summer there was another guy who was working in the same place, and he was my age. He was Black, and he was, when he had a new girlfriend, and he wanted to, and I was showing him pictures of my sort of girlfriend, but not really.
Did she know? Did she know who you were, Craig?
And so he said, why don't we go out on a double date? Well, I couldn't quite ask this girl to go out on a double date. And I always, afterwards thought about that. What message was I giving to Sherman? That, I was too shy to ask this girl to go out on a double date. And so, and I could relate a lot of other stories. But anyway, I know we're getting close on time, but I'll just get us out to the West Coast. Yeah. WSU Puyallup. Puyallup, we know what Puyallup is like. And I moved into another white space in a white job. And I always thought about my friend in North Carolina. And finally, it was about 1991. I got an office upgrade from a windowless cell to one with a window. And the woman in the office next to me was Black, and she was kind of a statewide 4-H leader. She went to Bethlehem Baptist in Tacoma, and we got to talking, and she said, "We're starting up a tutoring program. Would you like to join that?" So I said, "Sure." So I was the only white person in the program. I don't know how much conversation I shut down in meetings just from being there, but it was a great experience for me, and I felt like the kids who I was working with and their families, we developed the bonds, and it was a good experience. And I did that for about 3 years, and then that program ended. And then I volunteered at Nativity House for a while. And anyway, long story short, I was looking for a church. I went to a number of churches. And then in 2000, I went to Peace. And here was a multiracial church that seemed to be taking things seriously. And I felt like this was a place where I belonged. This was a place where, maybe I was not different. I was kind of, I could be a part of the, a part of making things better, and a part of learning, a part of, this lifelong undoing racism task. And I've been at Peace for almost 25 years now, and it's, and it was life-changing experience for me.
That's awesome. Thank you, Craig. So here's the final question. You've given us a lot of really good stories. So I don't know which one you want to go back to, but if you think about younger Craig, even when you had polio, or even, there's so many different.
At the Coke plant.
Yeah, but is there anything that you'd want to, when you're at the Coca-Cola plant, is there anything that you want to say to yourself, to that younger Craig, like, hey?
Yeah. I would say, tell Sherman, I'll ask her. We'll go out on that double date, and and just be less encased in myself, and more, more open, more willing to reach out to other folks, who didn't have the same background as me, and I would tell that to myself in my teens, in my 20s, in my 30s. And I think it was, and I was, and there's a number of things I did that I didn't, that I left out. But I think finally in my 40s, I started growing into that. But it took me that long. Yeah. And fortunately, I've had a lot of years since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Craig, for joining us. It's so nice to get to know you a little bit better.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Craig.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep. So long.
Yep. So that was Craig. That was so nice to hear. That was like our oldest guest so far, and so far many. Like we could talk to Craig for another 2 hours. Like he had so many stories and so much life experience.
Yeah. No, I just love I think I appreciated, actually, I really appreciate the way he finished that, which is oftentimes for people, and we've talked about this a lot in in these conversations of, I think there's a lot of self-reflection for people of how they've interacted with other folks, or how either they've been othered, or I think honestly, we have to be realistic about the fact that sometimes we're the people who are othering folks. And for Craig to say, hey, I wish I could go back to my teenage self, my 20-year-old self, 30-year-old self, 40-year-old self, and to realize that it is a lifelong journey, and that even if you're like, I feel stuck, like that doesn't disqualify you or count you out from the opportunity to grow and to think about what is the legacy that you want to leave, what is the arc that you want to bend for justice. I think Craig's story is a demonstration of that, and I think a lot of self-reflection too. Like there's a lot to unpack as we're going to. So might as well start now.
Exactly. All right, everybody. We'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.